Hello there everyone, this is Mr. Brass, and this is going to be just a sort of short response video for today. I'm going to be going away for a little bit, and I figured I would leave you guys behind a little video. Now this is going to be a response to the article called Slavery Myths Debunked by Jamelle, Bouie, and Rebecca Union. It points out the differences between indentured servitude and slavery. Now, my response to this is I like to ask, what is the difference between being a slave for life and being an indentured servant to someone who has no intent on ever letting you leave your contract and will go to great lengths to either extend the contract through the courts or, if they're really cruel, to make sure you die before the contract ends. That's one thing. Now, later on in the article, they also ask, why does it matter that Africans, Arabs, or Jews colluded in the transatlantic slave trade? They say that wouldn't give white Americans an excuse to do what they wanted to do with people that were just unlucky enough to get captured. It also points out that even if, I believe the mixed-race Anthony Johnson was the first person in North American colonies that held slavery, it doesn't change that slavery was a racially based system on hereditary slavery that harmed the majority of blacks. I say, well, it doesn't excuse it, it does provide a context to it. Slavery was a power game that many people wanted to be in, whether black or white. Now, whether they would be willing to fight and die for that is another thing altogether. They say that while it makes sense a slaveholder would want to make sure their slaves were given bare minimums to survive, basically this is us saying that slaveholders, well, yes, they would want their slaves to survive, they would just feed them scraps. This is used to refute the notion that 19th century white factory laborers were treated more harshly than black slaves. I point out that because blacks had owners, their care was made more of a priority than factory workers. A boss of a 19th century factory, if his employees were underfed and died, had plausible deniability. He could claim that the workers didn't spend their wages right and put themselves at risk. Said excuses did not exist really for slaves as they were under a more dependent situation. Now, the article, while it admits that while most white people didn't have slaves, it says that it is irrelevant because the South was a slave society and not just a society with slaves. That would mean that people sought to have slaves in the same way they want to have a house. This doesn't really work, in my opinion, as aspiring to have something doesn't necessarily mean you are willing to die for it. I aspire to be a rich man living in a mansion and having interracial gangbangs on a weekly basis. That doesn't mean I'm going to go to war to help make that a reality. A fact of the matter is that slavery hurt poor white people as it effectively made hiring them pointless, as rich white people could just make more, could just simply just not hire them. Lincoln's family himself left for that very reason. See David Herbert Donald's book Lincoln for that. So it is very well possible that there would be no reason for a poor white person in the South to want to fight a war over something that actively worked against them. I do like the article for pointing out how the North was complicit in maintaining Southern slavery for a long time, so that the North could economically benefit from it. They say it is still irrelevant because the South fought to expand slavery. I think this gets the North off too much. The North deserves more blame because they created an impression of a business arrangement in their complicity. which would logically result in bad things if they went out of their bounds to their partners in the South, which, as you imagine, would create a snowball effect and make a civil war a more better option. The article says that there is no evidence that blacks fought under the Confederate banner, even though they may have cooked and stuff like that. Professor of American History, Dr. Brion McClanahan, on episode 146 of his show, points out the flaw of this. Now, even anti-Confederates admit that blacks fought in the Confederacy, but say only in 1865, as apparently only then there were regiments of blacks taking up arms. Free blacks in the South who owned slaves themselves had reasons to support the war in many ways. Also, it depends on what you mean by soldier. Many people that played non-combatant roles in the army are still considered soldiers. Also, blacks could join the Confederate army if they could pass as white. So, anyway, that is all for today. This is Mr. Brass saying goodbye and get wise.